Welcome to the Book of Mormon Evidence Podcast with host Rod Meldrum. This week's Come Follow Me supplemental study is Lesson 32, Alma 53 through 63, Preserved by His Marvelous Power. We have another double episode for you with Jason Mao, who has spoken at many events, conferences, and now is a seminary teacher in Arizona. After serving a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Jason joined the U.S. Army and served as a paratrooper. He advanced through the ranks of the position of Team Sergeant for the Army's Elite Special Reactions Team. He has experienced and trained in joint counter-narcotics operations, protective services, counterterrorism, weapons and tactics training, and deployments to hostile areas. After the Army, Jason began working as a civilian police officer. He worked as a patrol officer, gang detective, narcotics detective, street crimes detective, and spent several years on SWAT as an operator and instructor. He's a certified police instructor in firearms, defensive tactics, tactical driving, and patrol rifle operations. He has twice been awarded the Law Enforcement Medal of Honor for gallant bravery in the line of duty and was recognized as the Community Service Officer of the Year for his department. In addition to the military and police training, he has a bachelor's degree in education, and he graduated from the Law Enforcement Academy in Arizona. In 2006, Jason took time off from his law enforcement career and worked as a civilian contractor for the U.S. government in Afghanistan. It was in Afghanistan that the first ideas for what would become the War Chapters series began to form. After a rocket attacked on his base in Herat, he turned to the scriptures and found comfort in reading about the experiences of Captain Moroni. He wrote these scenes as they played out in his mind all throughout his time there. He has spoken with youth all over the United States and volunteers his time and skills doing humanitarian work, conducting personal recovery operations, medical aid, and security in response to natural disasters around the world. He is deployed to assist during Hurricane Katrina and the earthquake in Haiti. Enjoy our friend Jason Mao.
Welcome, everybody. We are so excited about having this new week. We have a fantastic amount of information to share with you, and I have Jason Mao, and we have him joining us here by internet. And just to kind of give you a quick little update on what we're doing here. This week we're actually going to be covering some of the information from last week, which is Alma 53 to 63, and we also decided that we would go ahead and do Helaman chapters 1 through 6. So this is going to actually be covering 2 lessons, but this is all kind of together in what is called the war chapters, basically, or what Jason calls the war chapters. We are so glad to have you here with us, Jason. And just as a quick little overview, Jason is an expert on defending things.
Very well put. Very politically put.
Thank you. Breaking things and blowing up stuff.
I have been known to not only defend, but offend a few things, too. So.
Okay. Yeah. He has been in Special Forces. He was at the Army. He's was with the police officer there in Phoenix, Arizona. And he's seen a lot of bad guys and a lot of good people, and he's done a lot of defending. And
hold on, let me. I don't mean to interrupt, but Special Forces denotes that you were a Green Beret. I was never a Green Beret, so just
okay.
Want to clarify that. I don't want people thinking that I'm something I'm not. So
okay. Well, okay, we got that clarified. And the
thank you.
So this is what we're going to be talking about, and so we want to jump in. Again, we want to encourage you, if you have your annotated edition of the Book of Mormon, to get that out. And this is going to be we're going to be starting here on. I've just moved my page here, on page 317. And this is just going into chapter 52 that we were talking about. But we did talk about Teancum and how he slays King Amalickiah. And I wanted to bring out, we're just about to talk about that. So let's talk about Teancum. First off, Jason, I want you to just tell us a little bit about, because of your background, on an understanding that the Book of Mormon is being written by a guy who is basically a general or a leader of the Nephite armies, Mormon, yep. And he's writing about people who are in the military, basically. So what kind of different perspectives do you think you can bring to the table as a warrior yourself?
Well, the that unique perspective that Mormon had, having been a general. He started when he was 16 years old, and he ended up dying in conflict. So he never knew peace. His entire life was spent at war or experiencing war. And so his perspective on what it takes to be a warrior and what it takes to do the kind of things that Moroni did and Teancum did and the Stripling warriors did is different than somebody that's never experienced war, never experienced what it takes to get yourself to that position physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually to do things like specifically what Teancum did, which when you look at it from that perspective and you understand that aspect of the story, it's simply amazing that he was able to do what he did. And so I personally think it's important that we kind of hear that perspective, that warrior perspective, if you will, because we don't, fortunately or unfortunately, we don't live in a warrior society. We don't have seasons of war where our men march off once a year to war or whatever, and we're not under constant threat of invasion and fighting people hand to hand and things like that. And so we've kind of, as a general rule, kind of lost that mentality and understanding of what it takes to do the things like what Teancum did and what Moroni was able to accomplish. And so that perspective is very unique, and hopefully I can add to that a little bit.
Yeah, that's awesome. So bottom line is that through that lens, that basically you get to know the personalities of these guys a lot better.
Yeah.
And I'd like to have you just, if you can, I know you've studied a lot of like Captain Moroni and also Teancum specifically. In fact, I want to mention these are Jason's books here. This is the book number 1. It's called The Hero Rises, Moroni and the Battle for Manti. This is Jason's the first book. Actually, he calls it the War Chapter series, and this is book 1. Fantastic. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that book? And I've got the books up here. I'll just introduce these other two here. It's Teancum, the Ghost Soldier. This is book 2, but this is part number 1, and then part number 2 of Teancum, the Ghost Soldier, is also a part of that. So tell us a little bit about these books here.
Well, what they are is they are historical fiction based on the life of Captain Moroni. And what's really cool about these is that it's not scripture. There's no cross-referencing. There's no these, thous, and those. It doesn't promote or portray the LDS faith in any way. It is just the story, just the war story itself, and it's given to you from a warrior's perspective. And so what I've been able to do is take my own experiences, infuse into the story the humor, the sadness, the tactics, all the things that's being talked about, but people don't understand because they don't hear that story from Mormon's perspective. So there's some fictional characters in there to help tell the story. There are people that we all know existed, but they aren't mentioned in the Book of Mormon. For example, we all know that you don't do things like what Captain Moroni did without having a positive male role model in his life. So who inspired him to greatness? It was probably his father, but we don't know who that was. And so that's one of the fictional characters. A couple of other fictional characters are friends of his mother, people like that, because the book starts out when he is young and it works his way up to the time he becomes the leader of the great army. How does that happen? How do you at 25 take command of an entire army? How do you find people like Teancum and Lehi to work with? And then all the little B stories, the smaller stories within the Book of Mormon. Like at one point he sends somebody to go talk to the prophet Alma to get guidance from the prophet. Who's that? Who do you trust to go and make that connection with the prophet Alma? And just some other things that happen with the battles and whatnot. And it's really a fascinating, fun book to read. It's just a good old-fashioned rock'em sock'em war story about true Christian heroes that refuse to compromise with evil. And there's no boobs or bad language or a lot of blood. I mean, it is a war story, so people do get killed, but it follows the story of the Book of Mormon, and it's if your child is old enough to read the Book of Mormon, then the content is old enough for them. And I've got great grandmothers that have read it. I've got 8-year-old girls that have read it. I've got customers all over the world now. It's really kind of taken a life of its own, and I'm really honored.
I'll tell you what, and it really puts you there. I mean, you kind of feel like you're actually there with him, kind of as he's making these decisions and these important aspects of his life that build his character and so forth. It really is just an awesome book. We're glad to have you be a part of or sharing that information with us. So then the other one is about Teancum, which we're right into this whole part of it right now. in these chapters here in Alma. Tell us a little bit about how you portray or how you visualize Teancum. What kind of a guy is he?
You know what? Teancum is awesome. There's only a little tiny bit. He's only mentioned a couple of times in the Book of Mormon, but every boy that's ever been to Sunday school knows about Teancum. And every mom wants their child to be brave and strong like Teancum. Every girl wants to marry a hero like Teancum or like Captain Moroni. I mean, they're just mentioned just briefly, but there's such a mystique about these guys. There's something about what they did that just draws this interest out of us. And if you think about the life of Teancum, you think about what he did, what he was able to do, you come to an understanding that this wasn't just a normal human being. This was an exceptional person. This was a very elite and very, very skilled person. Now, you just don't wake up someday and walk up to the walls of an armed city and take a pointy stick and go, you know what, I'm frustrated. I'm going to climb over that walled city. I'm going to search out the entire place, even though it's looking for me, because I killed one king. I'm going to do this again. I'm going to search an entire city. I'm going to find the king. I'm going to stab him in the heart, and I'm going to get away. And then there's just so much that happens. And that isn't something that people just do. That takes a lifetime of skill to develop, to be able to do something like that. I have some idea of what it takes to be able to sneak into places where you're not welcome, past people there specifically there to stop you from doing what you're doing, and perform a task that most people aren't capable of performing. And it takes years and years and years to get to that point where you might have one chance to do it, to perform a mission like that. So something happened in Teancum's life, probably early on in his life, to get him to switch from civilian to hardened warrior. And so the story is about who he was, how he changed, how he became, and then what he was able to do with that new skill set. And so that's the whole backstory that I've created, or I've helped to create, about the story of Teancum. So the first book, it's a two-parter. It's a part 1 and part 2. The first book is his entire backstory. Page 1 is his birth and how he grew up, how he gained this code, if you will, to serve a cause greater than himself, because that's what he ended up doing, is dying for his country. And then what was the catalyst in his life that had him change from civilian to warrior? And in the story that I have, he actually starts out as a young physician, and he grows up in an influential family, marries his sweetheart, has a pretty picturesque life. But there's a series of very, very tragic situations that happen that absolutely changes the focus of his whole life. And he takes the knowledge that he had gained as a physician to make himself a better assassin. And he turns himself into a weapon for the Lord. And he focuses the rest of his energy on separating the sheep from the wolves. And so that's the end of the first book. In the second book, we get into actual deeds that he did in the Book of Mormon. We break them down step by step, how he's able to accomplish those things, what it takes to do that, and then some fictional characters that are added in place to help tell the story. And just like the first book, it's a historical fiction, but it's full of action and adventure, romance. For you ladies out there, he gets married, he has children. It's just a fun, exciting, action-packed book to read. And what it really does is it draws you back into the story of the Book of Mormon, because now you've built this. After you've read the books, you've built this image in your head of this great, amazing story. Now you go back and you read the Book of Mormon, and now you start seeing this stuff happen as you're reading about how, in one sentence or in one little verse, it says that I think it's verse 17 of chapter 52. No, I'm sorry, and later on in the Book of Mormon, where it says he vaulted the wall, he went with a cord from place to place, he kills the king, he escapes, and then he gets killed himself. So there's like 100 pages in my book, but that only takes one verse in the Book of Mormon to tell. So there's so much more that goes on there. And that's what I'm trying to do, is draw that story out, open up your mind a little bit, and get you drawn into this great adventure.
Say that it's so awesome to be able to do that. In fact, one of the things that I personally love about this is that you also put together a what you call the warrior's ethos.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could just tell us just a little bit about that, and then I'd like to actually see if we can play intros for this. They are fantastic. You put a lot of work into those.
The Warrior Ethos is a leadership initiative that I developed after becoming critically wounded as a Phoenix police officer. I was fighting a drug dealer in a dark alley. It was just me and him. And somehow during the fight, I detached both of my hamstring muscles from my pelvis bone, and eventually lost the ability to walk. And it took me about I won the fight. I still won the fight, but still undefeated. Yay for me. So it took me about 3 years of surgeries and therapy to be able to walk again. And during that time, pretty much everybody that I had relied on for strength and for trust had abandoned me. My wife divorced me.
Wow.
I was having some issues with the city. I was unemployable. And so when it was all said and done, I was homeless, unemployable, divorced, crippled, and bankrupt all at the same time. And so I had two options left in my life. It was victory or death. And both of those options made powerful arguments as I sat there in a crock pot of my own filth, just stewing in my own juices. And I chose victory. And I said, well, I've spent my entire adult life as a warrior. It's time for me to start walking the walk and stop saying I am and start acting like one. And I said, if there's a God in heaven, then there's a plan. And if there's a plan, then this is part of it. And I need to learn to trust. So I started rebuilding my life. I learned to walk again. I got my job back. I found love again. I got remarried. I wrote some more books. I started doing some public speaking, and people started asking me, how in the world could you do that? Because any one of those events, a divorce, bankruptcy, being crippled, any one of those would have been enough for a normal person to check out. And I said, well, it's just my warrior way. This is what I believe. And I'm giving you a real thumbnail sketch on this whole thing. I apologize. And so they asked me to define what that meant. And so what I did is wrote down what I call the warrior ethos. And I'm sure we'll be able to post a picture of that for everybody. Mm-hmm. And it's 15 verses of true heroic behavior. And it's basically the gospel of Jesus Christ through a warrior's perspective. And it's how people like me think, of how we overcome problems, how we prepare ourselves for adversity, how we're able to choose without even thinking about it, develop muscle memory to make correct choices. And that's because we have prepared ourselves to do that. We're not trying to play catch up during a crisis. We already have made these choices. Like, I am not going to drink alcohol. So if it ever comes up, I've already made that choice. I'm not going to do it. And that's basically what the warrior ethos is. Wow.
Yeah, in fact, that is such a powerful thing. Where can somebody get a copy of that? I think it's on your website, isn't it?
Yeah, it's at thewarchapters.com. Mm-hmm. My books are available through major bookstores. You can get them at Deseret Book, Amazon, places like that. Mm-hmm. The Warrior Ethos is available at The War Chapters, all one word, thewarchapters.com. Yeah. And I also do, once we're done with this whole COVID thing, I also do public speaking. I go to, I spoke at Education Week, EFYs, large youth gatherings, schools, corporate, things like that, about overcoming adversity and finding that warrior way.
Tell you, if you ever have a chance to see him live, I tell you what, it is so powerful. He almost always has standing ovation at all of our Firm Foundation events and that kind of thing, just because it's such a powerful thing. Also, so if you can also get the books at our bookstore as well, at bookofmormonevidence.org on the bookstore. Right. We have all of his books there. We keep those. Try to keep them in stock. We ran out, but we got. He sent us more, so we're glad about that.
Sell as many as you want, Rod. I'll keep sending you more.
All right. You'll keep making them, right? Okay, good deal. Good deal. All right. And now, so let's talk just a couple of minutes here. So we have Tiancum here, and let's go to our Alma chapter 51. And we're going to look at verses 33 through 37 for just a couple of moments here. So it says, what it says is here in verse 33, this is on page 317 in your annotated Book of Mormon. It came to pass that when the night had come, Tiancum and his servants stole forth and went out by night and went into the camp of Amalickiah. And behold, sleep had overpowered them because of their much fatigue, which was caused by the labors and the heat of the day. Now, this is a heat of the day thing is an interesting aspect of it. Now, as you continue reading, he stole privily into the tent of the king, put a javelin to his heart, and he caused the death of the king immediately. He didn't even groan, apparently. And he returned again to his own camp, and thus ended the 25th year. So in the morning, when the Lamanites woke up, they said, "Now it came to pass in the 26th year of the reign of the judges over the people of the people of Nephi. Behold, when the Lamanites awoke on the first morning of the first month, behold, they found Amalickiah was dead in his own tent." So this was basically, he killed him on the last day of the year. Now, this has been an interesting thing. It was an article written, this is a few years ago, by Daniel Peterson. He was formerly with Farms, and now he actually is the one of the head people of the Interpreter. If you know who they are, they're apologetic organization for that works trying to answer things for the church, basically. But he wrote this article, and he says, "May your new year begin better than Amalickiah's." This was actually published on December the 29th of 2011. I thought it was kind of a fun beginning thing here. But he says, hopefully your new year is going to be better than Amalickiah's was, because Amalickiah basically woke up dead that morning. But this is what he said, and this one, interestingly enough, folks, this one particular verse has been the foundations upon which the ideas of Book of Mormon geography as it relates to climate and weather have been really been based from. It says that, and the reason why is because it's the beginning of the year. They just had this big battle. They were tired and so forth because of the heat of the day. And so this is what Daniel Peterson wrote. He says, "Notice that opposing armies are both soundly asleep, owing at least partially to the toll exacted from them by heavy exertions in hot, draining weather. But notice, too, when this story happens, and thus ended the 25th year of the reign of the judges over the people of Nephi, and thus ended the days of Amalickiah. That is, Tiankim killed Amalickiah on New Year's Eve at the close of a very hot and fatiguing day. What can one conclude from this? It's virtually certain either that the story didn't occur in upstate New York or the upper Midwest, or that the Nephites followed a different calendar than we do, or perhaps both." You have to understand that Daniel Peterson is a big proponent of the Mesoamerica theory for the Book of Mormon, that the Book of Mormon lands were actually down in Central America. And so he said, he goes on, he says, "Average December to January temperatures in Rochester, New York, the nearest large city to Joseph Smith's Palmyra, range between 36 and 16 degrees Fahrenheit, accompanied by an average of 2 feet of snow per month." He says, "As I write, it's a relatively balmy 38 degrees in Rochester and overcast." Now, this is an interesting aspect. He says, "In mid-April, when the first month of the Jewish calendar begins, high temperatures in Rochester average roughly 55 degrees, while the nights drop near to freezing." So he basically leads the reader to believe that if this happened in New York, in Rochester, New York, that first off, that's not where the land of Zarahemla is located, and Dan Peterson knows that. He's trying to pick the highest point in the northern part, as cold as he can find. And then he says, and it's comparing it to New Year's Day, basically in our Gregorian calendar, to try to give the impression that there's no way that the heartland of America could have been the lands if you have this happening on a hot day at the beginning of their year. And then, but he does kind of then go into this. Well, in the Jewish calendar, it's different. Well, we know that they were using the Jewish calendar. They weren't using the Gregorian calendar. So why he even brings that up is really just an effort to try to cast doubts on this geography model. But the bottom line is, Dan Peterson, you know that this is actually, the Jewish calendar would be somewhere in April. And so I wanted to go to a couple few slides here. This is actually from this set of DVDs, which is right here. It's called the Book of Mormon Evidence this is number 1, which is actually 5 DVDs here. And this actually talks about weather and climate, and that is part of the DVD number 4. So there's 5 DVDs in here, and that's DVD number 4, Weather and Climate. And so I'm just going to give you just a couple of quick things about this. I think you'll enjoy some additional information. So what are the indications of weather and climate in the Book of Mormon? Are there any indications of climate at all then in the Book of Mormon? Well, it talks about, this is one of the biggest questions that people have all the time. It talks about, well, what about snow and so forth? Well, first off, we have in Alma chapter 46, and we just touched on this just briefly, but basically it says that there were some who died with fevers, which at some seasons of the year were very frequent in the land. And at the end of the verse, it says that was the nature of the climate. So the seasons of the year was the nature of the climate. So they had to have some kind of seasons. Now in Central America, they do have a wet and a dry season, but they don't have seasons like we have it up here, where things go dormant and then they come back again in the spring. Indications of snow and hail in the Book of Mormon. People say, well, it happened in North America. Why didn't they mention snow or hail? It actually does mention both snow and hail in the Book of Mormon, but only that this is in a metaphor sense. So it did exceed the whiteness of the driven snow. So this does talk about snow. It doesn't make much sense, though. This is in 1 Nephi chapter 11 for Lehi to talk about driven snow and compare the fruit of the tree of life, basically, to driven snow, if he knew that his posterity was going to be in this promised land that wouldn't experience snow. And that they would basically have no idea what driven snow looks like. So what would be the point of actually, using snow as a metaphor, that they could kind of understand how white this was? It also did talk about that they had his hail and his mighty storm will beat upon you, and so forth. Again, not saying that it actually hailed upon them, but it does mention hail and snow, both of which do happen in Jerusalem. So Lehi would have been aware of that, but this is clear back in Helaman where it talks about this hail and this mighty storm shall beat upon you. So we're going to talk about that in a little more detail here in just a couple of minutes. People say, well, how could people survive if they were living in tents like the Lamanites were doing, and the Nephites talked about living in tents as well? How could they survive in such cold weather? Well, it turns out that actually they didn't have any problem with living in tents. They lived just fine in tents, and they were all over North America when the original settlers came in and so forth. They found the Indians were having no problem living in tents, and they were doing just fine. In fact,
they were actually much better. They were doing it much better than the first pilgrims were in their wooden blockhouses.
Yeah, exactly. Now, this is some of the Plains Indians, but this is what the Nephites talk about, that they had tents, right? They said that the Lamanites wandered about in the wilderness, and so, following the migrating beasts and so forth. And so this is basically what their homes would have been. A tent would be basically a teepee. And so this is tribes up in Montana. It's even colder in Montana, so they have no problem with that. This is the verse that we just read about the labors of the day, and that's they're saying that this is because it's a tropical climate. How is it possible then that the heartland geography could be correct if it was so cold and they were in January in the Mississippi River Valley, which is obviously very cold, and these people came dressed in basically nothing but a loincloth? Well, you have to understand something about the Nephite calendaring. So this is an important question. When was the Jewish Passover celebrated? It's at the first full moon after the vernal or spring equinox. It's usually somewhere in about mid-April. Christ observed Passover, as we know, just before he was crucified. So we know about when that was. We also then know here in America, when Christ was crucified, what happened here. Book of Mormon records at the time of Christ's death that it was the first month. On the fourth day of the month, there arose a great storm. So now we have an interesting connection between the death of Christ in the old world and the sign of his death, basically in the new world, and that's basically was the first month there arose this great storm. That's because both groups are Hebrews, so they're actually going to be in the first of their year. So that means if Christ died in April, and that is when the Nephites observed the corresponding calamities, then the Nephite first month was somewhere in April, which is not too hard to understand. And if you understand that the geography, unlike when Dan Peterson basically was talking about Rochester, New York, that would be where the final battles took place. That area up there had nothing to do with where they were at this point in time, which was Zarahemla, which is down about by St. Louis, Missouri, and that's where we have almanacs going way back. And the average high temperature in the month of April for the state of Missouri is 67 degrees Fahrenheit, or recorded high temperature is 93 degrees. I don't know about you, Jason, but would 93 degrees be loincloth weather to you?
Well, you got to factor in the humidity around that place too. So yes, if
Yes.
it wouldn't scare the children, I would have been wandering around in a loincloth when I was at St. Louis. When I visited St. Louis, yeah.
That's right. That's right. And then we also have just other interesting things, like, for example, it talks about having very thick garments here in Alma chapter 49, verse 6, and also 43, verse 19. They talked about being dressed with thick clothing. So this also gives us some ideas. We also know that parakeets, Carolina parakeets, were once common, and they were wiped out. But parakeets basically are warm weather animals, and so they would have been. This is a picture of one of these that was taxidermied. But they have been extinct now for quite a long time. But they are a warm weather animal, and they were in the heartland of America. And we have actually copper effigies that are made of these different kinds of birds like that. So a parrot. Look at the beak on this Hopewell Mound Builder copper effigy. It looks like a parrot. And again, parrots aren't here now. So there's also a few other indicators of climate. We're going to come back to those in just a couple minutes, though. So bottom line is that this makes perfect sense then in the heartland of America, that this would actually have happened. So now we get into chapter 52. This is when Amalekite is dead.
Can I point out something?
Yes, please. Yes.
Can I point out something real quick, Rod?
Yep.
In verse 34 of chapter 51, just a few words right there is Mormon's attempt to help us understand exactly who Teancum is. Okay? Because, and no offense, but there's a lot of your readers that have never experienced combat, don't understand what it takes to do these kind of things. Mormon has, but he only had a little bit of space to tell this amazing story. And so he's hoping that warrior perspective will come out in these words. And so if you follow along in 34, you'll know exactly who Teancum is. And it came to pass that Teancum stole privately into the tent of the king. Now, the tent of the king is not going to be on the outside of the camp.
Right, it's going to be in the middle.
All out there by itself. They put the tent of the leader in the middle of the camp, and they put everything else around it. So in the middle of the army is the king's tent. Now, not only did Teancum have to sneak into camp, past all of these guards who were either awake or asleep or inebriated or whatever they are, he had to work his way past all of these guards and then into the tent, which I guarantee you is being guarded. They don't leave the tent of the king unprotected. So just the fact that he was able to do that alone tells you the caliber of warrior that this man is. So the next one, put a javelin in his heart. He stood over a sleeping man and killed him in his sleep. I don't know if you've ever hunted deer and ever had what's called buck fever, but right when you're about to get to that point, you get a dump of adrenaline. And everything shakes, and you get tunnel vision, and you get this audio inclusion, and all these crazy things start happening to you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So he wasn't experiencing buck fever because he had done this. He had experienced this kind of level of stress before. And the reason we know that is he was so precise with the thrust of that javelin that he was able to guarantee what in medical terms is called flaccid paralysis, which means there's just a couple of points on your body that if you induce a wound into that point, the body is dead. No reaction, no jerking. In SWAT, we aim for a specific point on the body because if there's a hostage being held when the finger's on the trigger, if we hit anywhere other than this place that will guarantee flaccid paralysis, there may be enough consciousness or lucidness or unconscious nervous reaction to pull the trigger. But when you guarantee flaccid paralysis, nothing happens. He drops, he dies. So he was able to pinpoint that point so well, and he wasn't stressed with the shaking and all of this, and he was able to sneak into the tent fearlessly. And then he got away. He didn't get caught. He snuck out of this place and had enough presence of mind to go back and wake up his men. So in that one little verse, you get to understand why it's important that we understand who Teancum is, because he is a warrior. Now, how do you get to that point where you can stand over a sleeping man and stab him to death and be mentioned by name in the Book of Mormon as a valiant hero? He murdered the dude in his sleep, but we call him a hero. So what is it, the duality of this guy, that he can do that and still be named by name as a true friend to liberty and stood next to Captain Moroni in importance? And people and we tell our children, you need to be like Teancum. We don't get that. We don't understand what's going on in this man's mind. This is a defenseless man laying prostrate on his bed. Is there honor in this? Is he going to be condemned for not this isn't a righteous combat. He's defenseless. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on here. It takes a special kind of person to be able to do what he did.
Yeah. And it takes a special kind of preparation. I mean, you don't just wake up one morning and go, gosh, I think I'll go sneak into the enemy camp and go see if I can find the king. And if I happen to find him, I'm going to put it exactly in the right spot so he doesn't even make noise or wake his guards up.
Doesn't gasp. There's no death rattle. There's no falling off the bed. No clanking of metal. Nothing. Absolute silence, because the guards. I mean, what's the tent? About that thick of cloth.
Yeah.
There's guards on the outside. There's guards on the outside of that tent, and there's guards walking through the camp. Nobody heard anything.
So he
nobody heard
basically
him come in. Nobody heard him kill the king. Nobody heard him get away, because they didn't know he was dead until they woke up the next morning.
Yeah, he's like in
stealth
mode.
Yeah, that's how good he was. He was able to do that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so let's keep on. So that then Teancum, then he prepares for war there in verse 5. Truly he was preparing to defend himself against them by casting up walls round about and preparing places of resort. And we talked about the places of resort already last week and several other times. These are armed, heavily defended areas that the people could basically go to in the event of an attack. They would usually be stocked with food and have water available, usually in a spring or pond of some sort, or maybe a river through there. And bottom line is that they would be basically prepared to take them on. A small group of people could actually really defend against a much larger army using these defensive tactics that were being brought out.
In ancient siege warfare, the number was 5-1. If you wanted to take a castle, you needed 5 times the amount of men that were inside that castle.
Yeah.
Because you were going to lose a rate of 5-1 as they tried to get inside there.
Yeah. And that's why they had these killing fields, like we talked about last week. So a couple other things. So let's see. And verse 9, and he also sent orders unto him that he should fortify the land bountiful and secure the narrow paths which led into the land northward. So he had two things to do. Basically secure and fortify the land bountiful area, and also the narrow paths that led into the land northward. So that was another couple of things that they were trying to do. Let's see, and then in verse 10, and Moroni also sent to him, desiring him that he would be faithful in maintaining that quarter of the land, and that he should seek every opportunity to discourage the Lamanites in that quarter, as much as was in his power, that perhaps he might take again by stratagem or some other way those cities which have been taken out of their hands. So he wasn't trying to just do a direct frontal assault, just right. Man to man, hopefully our guys are stronger or better or more equipped or better trained or whatever, and we're going to just win. Instead, he's trying to use strategies. And so can you see some strategies going on throughout these chapters here, Jason?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's some amazing thought process that's happening. Up until this point, the way armies would fight is they would have at each other in a big field, or they would send out their champions. Now, Moroni loves each one of his guys to death, and he's willing to die for them. The last thing he wants to do is just needlessly have them slaughtered by having both armies just bang against each other. And he's outnumbered, too, because he's got to defend the cities. He's got to defend from the kingmen. He's got a civil war going on and an invasion. He's got to separate his troops, so he doesn't have the concentrated forces that he needs, the overwhelming force to take on the Lamanite army. So they have to use strategy. Moroni doesn't want his men just needlessly being killed. He doesn't need to needlessly just fling men against the city wall, hopefully to topple it down. So he's telling his leaders, he's telling his generals, his Teancums, his Lehis, build these fortifications, use strategies, trickery. Moroni actually got a whole city drunk so he wouldn't have to hurt anybody.
Yeah.
These amazing strategies. There's another one where he climbs up himself on the city wall and casts weapons down to the people on the inside. So when the Lamanites woke up, people on the inside had weapons, people on the outside had weapons. They were completely surrounded. This was absolutely foreign to the type of warfare that they're used to fighting. And so he was able, with his intellect, which makes him an even better leader and example for us, that he's not just this gigantic man clubbing people like a baby seal everywhere he goes. He's using his smarts. He's saying, look, I have when this battle's over, I have to have people to raise the flocks and fix the buildings and plow the fields. I can't just waste the lives, these precious lives. I've got to try to trick these Lamanites. I've got to try to trick them out of it. And I don't want to kill the Lamanites either. I want to be their friend, their brother.
Yeah.
We want to trade with them. We want to give them the gospel of Christ. Why would I want to kill them? Let's see what we can do to trick them out of these places rather than kill them.
Yeah. Which is what they basically go in and do here. Then Teancum takes the city of Mulek. Here in this particular thing, it was impossible. This is in verse 17. He says that it was impossible that he could overpower them while they were in their fortifications. Therefore he abandoned his designs and returned again to the city Bountiful to wait for the coming of Moroni, that he might receive strength to his army. It came to pass that Moroni did arrive with his army at the land Bountiful. This is verse 18. In the latter end of the 27th year of the reign of the judges over the people of Nephi, and in the commencement of the 28th year, Moroni and Teancum and many of the chief captains held a council of war. So this is one of the only times I can remember that they actually talked about that they actually got their generals basically together and they held this council of war. What they should do to cause the Lamanites to come out against them to battle, they might be by some means flatter them out of their strongholds, because they built the strongholds. They knew how good they were. We don't want to take on our own strongholds here, guys. Let's figure out a way to get them to come out and fight us out here in the open.
The Council of War is another indicator. The Council of War is another indicator of the maturity, even at a young age, that Moroni had. Mm-hmm. He was willing to accept advice from other people, listen to their counsel, and together come up with the best solution to the problem. He wasn't walking around saying, "I'm in charge. I'm the general. You're going to do it this way." He brought the group together, and he included his leaders in the decision-making process, so there would be a consensus. That's another very mature point that Mormon tries to make about who this guy really is.
Yeah. Yep. It's interesting though, because Jacob, the leader, he was a Zoramite apparently, and he wasn't buying that. He was like, "No, not going to do it. Not going to come out," and so forth. Yeah. So they say, "Okay, well, they tried to entice him to come out and meet him out in the fields, and he's going, 'Do I look stupid?
Why? Why would I come out of this stronghold you built for me? Yeah.
What's in it for me? There's nothing in that for me. Just more death on our side." Anyway, so it came to pass, Moroni this is verse 21, having no hopes of meeting them upon fair grounds, therefore he resolved upon a plan that he might decoy the Lamanites out of their strongholds. Therefore he caused that Teancum should take a small number of men and march down near the seashore. And Moroni and his army by night marched in the wilderness on the west of the city of Mulek. And thus on the morrow, when the guards of the Lamanites had discovered Teancum, they ran and told to Jacob their leader. It came to pass that the armies of the Lamanites did march forth against Teancum, supposing by their numbers to overpower Teancum because of the smallness of his numbers. And as Teancum saw the armies of the Lamanites coming out against them, he began to retreat down by the seashore northward. And it came to pass, when the Lamanites saw that he began to flee, they took courage and pursued them with vigor. And of course, we know what happens. Moroni comes and slips in the back, takes out the few guards that they left holding the city, and now basically they move in.
Yeah, well, Moroni actually gets wounded. If you look at verse 35, he actually gets wounded in the engagement. Yeah. So that tells you another aspect about his leadership personality is he's willing to stand shoulder to shoulder with his men and do exactly what he's asking them to do. That he's not above them in any way. He's just their servant. And so he's fighting alongside of them, and he actually gets wounded. Yeah.
Yep. So he's fighting right along with his men. He's not basically sitting in some bunker behind all his men, barking out orders. He's right in there in the fray.
He's down there mixing it up.
Yep. Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if he's the one that kills Jacob the Lamanite. That those two were going at each other. It doesn't say that, but it's kind of implied from my perspective that those two guys ended up fighting each other.
Yeah. Which I think does happen, fairly often in these kind of hand-to-hand combat battles. The two leaders out there, and everybody kind of just let's let the leaders go after it.
Yeah. And there's also in 36 another example of my good buddy Lehi. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That he was attacking from behind because they broke their armies up in a couple different sections, and he was attacking with such fury with his strong men that the Lamanites in the rear delivered up their weapons of war.
Yeah.
So again, here's Lehi. They're like, "Hey, I'll fight Moroni all day long. We'll take on that Teancum dude, the guy that killed our king. But that's Lehi over there, so we're going to give up because that's Lehi." So it gives you
they throw their weapons down and run away hiding.
They said, well, we're having a good time, fighting Moroni. Actually, we wounded him, but Lehi shows up and we're done. So I'm not fighting Lehi. So that should tell you something. That's, again, in my profession, we call that a clue. That's Mormon trying to tell us how powerful and strong Lehi was. That just his identity alone, just the idea you might be fighting him, causes armed men to flee.
He had a reputation.
He had it, and a well-earned reputation too.
Yeah. And then, but interesting though, because if you take a look at your warrior, the warrior ethos here that you have, one of the things that I find is interesting is that these are men of war. These are warriors, but they're not mercenaries. They're not doing this because they love killing people. In fact, they abhor killing people. And here in verse 37, it says, "Now Moroni seeing their confusion, he said unto them," this is after he's basically they've taken Jacob, their leader, the Zoramite. He's now dead. Moroni was wounded, like you said, and then basically he says, he said unto them, "If you will bring forth your weapons of war and deliver them up, behold, we will forbear shedding your blood." I mean, this is a guy who doesn't want to kill people.
Let's put this into perspective. He's wounded.
Yeah.
These people, like 10 seconds prior to that moment, were trying to kill him, actively trying to kill him. Yeah. He still doesn't want to do this to him. He still doesn't want to hurt them. After they literally put a hole in his body with a sharp, pointy object. And he still has that much love for Christ and love for his fellow man that he sees what's happening and he goes, "You know what? We'll stop if you'll stop." And
they did. In this particular case, they did. Yeah, so they stopped fighting, and basically he stopped killing them. Told his men, okay, gather up their weapons of war. Basically, they disarmed, and then basically they gather them up, and they now have prisoners. Now they got to take care of them, and that becomes another big issue that's going on here for Captain Moroni. Yeah, so let's go into chapter 53. And Moroni went, this is verse 2, Moroni went to the city of Mulek with Lehi and took command of the city and gave it to Lehi. Now behold, this Lehi was a man who had been with Moroni in the more parts of all of his battles. So these guys had fought hand to hand, or side by side, I should say, and he knew him personally. And he was a man like unto Moroni, and they rejoiced in each other's safety. They were beloved by each other and also beloved by all the people of Nephi. So now they're going to head out to do some of this work here in verse 3. It came to pass that after the Lamanites had finished burying the dead and also the dead of the Nephites, so they actually put them to work burying the dead, so to keep them occupied, so they didn't get to figure out have their own war council and basically decide how
that's very common.
Get it done.
They work them all day, so they don't have the strength to rise up.
That's right. Keep them occupied. They were marched back into the land bountiful and Teancum by the orders of Moroni, caused that they should commence laboring and digging a ditch round about the land or the city bountiful. And he caused that it should be built a breastwork of timbers upon the inner bank of the ditch, and they cast up dirt out of the ditch against the breastwork of timbers. And thus they did cause the Lamanites to labor until they encircled the city of bountiful round about with a strong wall of timbers and earth to an exceeding height. And this city became an exceedingly stronghold ever after. And in this city they did guard the prisoners of the Lamanites. Now it's interesting because this area of Bountiful is essentially Ohio area. If we're talking about that, one of the biggest Hopewell sites is actually called. It's actually the place name. It was actually on the farm of a guy by the name of Mordecai Cloud Hopewell. This is how the word Hopewell got associated with the Nephites. Basically, remains here in Ohio. There was this Hopewell site is a massive site. I can't remember, but 100 and something plus acres this site is, and the ditches and the earth banks are still there. Of course, the palisade of timbers is long gone. That would have been taken down by by bugs and rotting and so forth of the wood over the course of time. But you can actually see this. If you'd like to learn more about some of these different earthworks. This is called the Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley. This is the 48 plates of the actual, these were woodcuts originally. That was in the very first Smithsonian book, and that's by that name, Ancient Monuments of Mississippi Valley. This is by Squire and Davis. But in here they have these wonderful woodcuts and so forth that shows these places here. So, for example, I'm going to show you this is Fort Hill over here on this side, and Fort Hill is a fortified place of resort. Essentially, it's got the ditches on the all around the entire hill, but it has spaces between the ditches. Unfortunately, the archaeologists interpret that as being openings or access points, but we know that those were actually probably where the towers were, because that's where they've actually found post molds in those towers. This is Fort Hill. I wanted to talk to you just briefly about this one right here. This was called. This is one of the woodcuts here that shows the killing field over here on this side. On the right hand side here is the Fort Ancient, which is actually still, you can still go there today. There's actually a interpretive center there, and it's just an amazing site. But there's over 3.5 miles of earth embankments. They said if you took the amount of earth that was moved, if you took that earth and put it into a dump truck, and then you started to fill up dump trucks one after the other, how many dump trucks in a row would it be? Well, they actually stopped counting, and they started to do just, if you had just a standard sized dump truck, those dump trucks, if you lined them up, basically the front bumper to back bumper of each one, that they moved enough earth to fill 200 miles of dump trucks in this one place. So this is a massive amount of earth that they're moving here. And then so I wanted to show you that this is the that's the North Fork works there. And so this is, let's see, that's North Fork. See if I can find here really quickly the Hopewell site itself. I think that's what they're calling that one in this particular group here. All right, let me see. I had that ready to go here, and now I not remember which page it was. So anyway, all right. Yeah, that's it then. Yeah, this is it right here. This was the today it's called the Hopewell site. That's called North Fork Works, and back in that time frame, but this is actually a huge area here. So let's see, the scale 500 feet to an inch. So this is each inch of this map is 500 feet on the ground. This had a great big area where they had 3 huge mounds. The one in the middle here was almost 500 feet, over 500 feet in extent here, these mounds. You can actually go back in this area today, and then you can still see the ditches and the earth banks. The ditch is on the outside, the earth bank is on the inside of this whole thing, and there's of course there's a river right here. This is the North Fork of the Paint Creek is going right there. So this is actually one of the big places. Could have been one of the places they were actually fortifying at this particular point in time in the Book of Mormon. All right, so moving back to this, then we have they are now getting these places ready to be defended. Let's see, and they were. Oh, and then I wanted to point out here in verse 8 of chapter 53. And now it came to pass that the armies of the Lamanites, that the armies of the Lamanites on the west sea south, while in the absence of Moroni on account of some intrigue among the Nephites, which caused dissensions among them. Doesn't that sound interesting? So the Nephites are preoccupied by people who are basically trying to overthrow their government, trying to mess up their civilization. And so they're kind of been preoccupied with that. He called it intrigue among the Nephites. And while they weren't paying attention, all of a sudden the Lamanites, their main enemies, basically come in from the West Sea south. Now that's an interesting thing. What they said, West Sea south. And if you know about Jonathan Neville's research, that's basically, we're talking about the lower Mississippi River here. This is the West Sea south. There's a West Sea, but there's a northern one too. But this is the West Sea south to differentiate between those two seas or bodies of water. And says, and in verse 9, and thus because of iniquity amongst themselves, yea, because of dissensions and intrigue among themselves, they were placed in the most dangerous circumstances. So, Jason, what do you see happening in our nation today?
Iniquity and dissensions among ourselves that will place us into a most dangerous situation.
Yeah, because we are basically, while we're fighting about whose lives matter and whose don't matter, and so forth, and then we're dealing with basically people who are out of control, will not obey the laws, do not want to obey the laws, have cities that basically defy the laws of the federal government and the states, and bottom line is we have all this intrigue going on in here, but who are some of our actual enemies around the world?
People that hate freedom, people that hate Christianity, people that would rather die than know the name of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
The extremists in both politics and religion all over the place.
Yeah,
they're many and they are organized.
Yeah, but I want to just kind of break it down even to possibly in the past we've had not very good relations with Russia. And Russia has been one of those countries who actually has nuclear capability that could actually annihilate, portions of the United States with their nuclear arsenal. But more recently, China has become really the greatest threat, according to our military intelligence people, that China is a much bigger threat than Russia is now because they have an extremely strong economy, whereas Russia's is not. And they have also nuclear capability, but they also have a lot of our technology.
Yeah, they've been stealing our technology for a long time, and unfortunately, members of our government have been allowing it. That's one of the reasons why they're so upset right now. Is the president that's in place right now is he's trying desperately to stop the wholesale theft of our intellectual properties.
Yeah, and in fact, bring in almost all of our military technologies and so forth back to being manufactured here in the United States, so they can't actually have that information. But if you take a look at the latest Russian fighters and so forth, they look just like ours. In fact, they don't even try to hide it. They look just like our F-35s and so
carbon
forth.
Copies.
They are just like ours. There's some technologies that may not be quite as good, but overall they are a serious threat. So while we're messing around with these looters and so forth, and shutting down our cities and things like that, and burning places, and our news is preoccupied with that. What do you think Russia and China are doing right now? They just got to be salivating.
They're just sitting back watching us kill ourselves, and they're going to come in and clean up the mess. They're going to take whatever they want because we're not going to be able to defend ourselves. We're going to be apathetic or lazy, or actually believe that socialism and communism are a good thing, and we're going to welcome them with open arms. Yeah. It's really kind of heartbreaking that our society has had it so good for so long that we actually consider the source of our joy to be bad. Yeah.
Let's just jump into one of my favorite, and probably a lot of your favorite parts of the whole Book of Mormon. That is the Helaman warriors, Helaman stripling warriors. There's 2,000 of these sons of Ammon. These are the people who refused to take up arms. They had been such a bloodthirsty people in the past that they basically said, we are not going to do this ever again. We made an oath that we are never going to take up arms again for any purpose. We will never shed the blood of other people. And so they basically are putting all the onus of responsibility now on the Nephites to defend them. But then they realize that they have there's some of their younger generation that never took the oath. Mm-hmm. And these oaths were so serious that they would not do this no matter what. But they said, but these kids of ours, they haven't taken the oath, and they're now old enough that they have these sons, and we'll help to defend the country. We'll help defend.
Yeah, the sons actually said these oaths aren't transferable. We haven't taken them yet. We'll go and fight so that you don't have to violate your oath, and so that we can serve our country, and we can help protect the Nephites that are suffering so much for our good. And so these young boys, these children, took up arms to go and decided to go and fight against the Lamanites.
Yeah. So these are not very old. Probably in their 16, 17, 18 range.
Well, yeah. Let's use a little combat math.
Yeah.
How old was Moroni when he was given command of the whole army?
25.
25.
Right?
He was 25 years old. And in every letter, every epistle, every time they talk about them, they talk about their sons, their lads, the boys, the young ones, these stripling warriors, right? So if you know the word stripling, you know it's a very, very old word. It's basically a euphemism, and it means green tree or sapling. It's a euphemism for teenager. So if Moroni's 25 and they're calling these guys teenagers, they're calling them their sons, their lads, the young ones, how old do you think that they are? They're probably 12 to 18 years old. They're high school age boys.
Yeah.
Because they're not old enough to carry a weapon and have that responsibility, but they weren't part of the first generation that made the oath. Mm-hmm. So these are young boys, young men that are willing to stand up and fight for their country.
Yep. And they said that they were, this is in verse 20, and they were all young men, and they were exceedingly valiant for courage and also for strength and activity. So these were some...
They went outside and played. They went on their Xboxes all day long.
That's right. But behold, this was not all. They were men who were true at all times in whatsoever thing they were entrusted. Yea, they were men of truth and soberness, for they had been taught to keep the commandments of God and to walk uprightly before him. What some great parents.
It's almost like they've got a blueprint, if you will, for how our children are supposed to be today, how we're supposed to be raising our children, this final royal generation, the Zion's Youth Battalion. And it's exactly the same way that Christ was raised and grew up. If you read about in Luke, you read about how Christ grew in wisdom and stature and in the favor with God and with man. That's exactly the same way that the Lamanite boys, these young Elam and stripling warriors, grew up. They grew in wisdom and stature. They were strong. They were faithful. They were intelligent. They were courageous. They grew in the favor of God and man. They were honest and true. They did everything that they were supposed to do. The scripture says that they performed every order to exactness.
Yeah.
Now, not only am I a military man, but I used to work with the Scouts before the church stopped working with that program. I couldn't get 14-year-old boys to show up on a Wednesday with their shirts on. How you get 2,000 boys to do anything to exactness is a miracle. But they didn't come to military training with Helaman to learn that. They showed up like that because they lived and they grew up being raised by true converts to the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Their parents taught them this.
Yeah.
This isn't something that they were innately gifted with. And it's the exact same pattern of growth that Christ used as he was growing up. Mm-hmm. There's two examples for us now for this royal generation. They grow in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and with man. And this is how the Lamanites did it. In the New Testament in Luke, we read about how Christ did it. This is the blueprint for this royal generation. You have to be, they were active. They went outside. They enjoyed life. They were strong. They were happy. They were industrious. They were doing all these things. They didn't just sit in their rooms all day and let life happen to them. They were actually proactive in their development.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I think about though, and that is the difference for them. I mean, for them, life was a challenge. I mean, food did not come easy. It didn't just show up in your refrigerator or show up, at the McDonald's, or whatever. It basically, you had to go out and get it, or go out and gather it, or plant it, or harvest it, and then plus they lived in a time. This is a whole time frame here when there was a lot of war going on around them. So they were probably hearing about what was going on from the other armies and so forth. So these parents, they realized that they couldn't just raise up a bunch of kids who had no experience in life, that had no basis as far as the gospel and the Ten Commandments. They had to actually say, you know what, these young men, high probability that they may end up in battle someday, and we want them to be sober. Meaning that they don't take things too lightly. They realize that every day is another possibility of either you get closer to being able to survive or you basically move away from it. And so there's that aspect as well. So we need to move here. So let's go ahead and then we'll talk about here to. I love this Moroni's epistle to Amaron on the Eastern Front. Said, I would tell you somewhat concerning the justice of God and the sword of his almighty wrath, which doth hang over you, except you repent and withdraw your armies into your own lands. So, I mean, he just tells it like it is. You know what? Either you withdraw, or God's going to smite you. It's interesting that he's not telling we're going to smite you. He says God's going to smite you.
That's another key about who this guy was. Never once in any of the epistles or any of his sayings or any of his actions did he go, I did this.
Yeah.
He always said, we won because of God, or my men accomplished this mission. Never once did he take credit for anything. And think of all the amazing things he was able to do. Yeah. Every time he had a chance to say something, it was always because of our faithfulness, because God fights our battles, because we're on his side. Yeah. It's not because of our arms or our weapons or our technology. It's because we are followers of Christ and he fights our battles for us.
We're excited to announce the 26th International Book of Mormon Evidence Conference, September 25th and 26th, with special guests Glenn Beck, Tim Ballard, and David Barton. And you can watch from any device. Tickets can be found at bookofmormonevidencestreaming.com. If you'd like to learn more about Jason Mao and his books, please go to thewarchapters.com. One mother said, "The most amazing story and posters to hit me and my kids' lives. Love the entire idea behind it. Thank you. I had such a fun time explaining Moroni in more detail to my children than ever before. It's inspiring."